And it says we are live. So, hi everyone. I am #1 Marmaduke fan, and today I am joined by DC Comics writer Meredith Finch and artist Colin Dyer, who is making his artistic debut with the graphic novel adaptation of The Book of Ruth. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So this is really exciting. I love the story of the Book of Ruth growing up. You both know this, but for people who are just joining us, the link to the Kickstarter is in the description of this video. And you just today, just about an hour before we went live, have passed your goal. It is 100% funded. So congratulations.
Yay, thank you. I don't even think it was an hour before we went live. I feel like Colin sent me a text message like 30 minutes ago. I feel like it was like 45 minutes ago. I was like, oh, we're 99%. We only need like $120. And then I went upstairs and then I got back downstairs and I saw the text from Colin going, we did it.
So my first question was going to be if your Kickstarter gets funded, but since it has been funded, I have seen some crowdfunding campaigns. They might do a Kickstarter campaign and then they do a second campaign on Indiegogo kind of as a victory lap. Is that something you guys have ever considered?
I didn't even think about it until Billy Tucci mentioned it. He's like, oh, if you do Kickstarter, you should also do Indiegogo. Because I was on his show maybe last Thursday, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm torn. I don't know what to do. And I think maybe it's a conversation that Colin and I should have, because I feel like this was what I wanted. I wanted us to fund the book so that we could get it out there in the hands of people. At the same point, if we did it on Indiegogo, I know that there are people who only do Kickstarter and people who only do Indiegogo. So by not putting it on Indiegogo, am I, limiting the scope or the amount of people who could see it? So
right.
It's hard because I have to say, honestly, I feel like asking for more money would be greedy, because I really set this goal as like, if we could get this goal, basically it pays for the book and we can do another one. That was the goal. Like if we could get to here, then it gives me the confidence to say, absolutely, there's a market for this. We can do another book.
It does seem to be kind of like there are pros and cons to both platforms. One of the pros of Indiegogo seems to be the option to do the in-demand store. So especially if there's like a waiting time before it goes to print, then there can be like an opportunity for like latecomers or for people who just discovered it to hop on board. But yeah, I'll respect whatever decision you go with. But it'll be interesting to see what you do for that. So I listened to you guys discuss your book with Creator Talks podcast, and you found each other through Facebook. So give us a little origin story, Meredith, for how you conceived of your graphic novel edition of The Book of Ruth and how you got in touch with Colin.
Sure. When I started doing the first creator-owned book I did was Rose, through Image Comics. And when I was doing Rose, I reached out to a bunch of artist agents that I knew, and said, send me your portfolios because I'm looking at doing a creator-owned project. And I didn't really have a specific art style in mind. I just knew that I would know it when I saw it. And when I saw Iguara's portfolio, I was like, instantly, that's it. He just had a uniqueness to his style that I knew that was what I wanted for Rose. And at the same point, I looked through a significant number of portfolios working on Rose and then working again on Xena with Dynamite. So I kind of had a good idea of what was out there in terms of art agents. And I knew that they weren't what I wanted for the Book of Ruth. And Dave and I were talking about it, and it was actually his suggestion to put it on Facebook. He's like, why don't you just put it on Facebook and see what happens? I was like, no, who's going to like it? Really? Am I going to get anybody on Facebook? So I threw it out there on Facebook, and I have to say I think I threw it out mid-afternoon on a Saturday or something like that. And by that night, I was overwhelmed. There was an overwhelming response of people saying, here's my portfolio. I'd love to do this project. Because I was very open about the fact that it was going to be a religious book and I wasn't looking for specifically a superhero type of artist. I knew I didn't want it to be that way. And then I kind of looked at everybody, and there were so many fantastic artists that submitted their work that day. And I was like, oh, if I had this kind of book, they'd be perfect. But nobody was just right for what I think both David and I had in mind for this book to look like. And I went to bed that night, and through the whole process of writing the book and the idea of coming up with the idea of the book, I felt called to do it. Like I just felt very strong pull toward that story and toward doing it that way. And I have a very strong faith. And I just felt like it was a step that maybe this is the purpose of me writing comics, was that someday I could bring this book to fruition. So I went to bed that night, and I said a prayer. I said, Lord, I feel like if you want me to do this book, and I feel very strongly that you do, if you want me to do this book, then you'll help me with the artist. I really need you to help me find the right artist. And I woke up the next morning on Sunday, and I just kind of went to bed. Normally I would stew and think about it. I was like, nope, I prayed about it, and so I let it go. And I got up the next morning, and I came downstairs, and I sat down, I had my cup of tea. I'm like, oh, let's see what's on, if I've got any more submissions on Facebook. And Colin's submission was literally the very first submission I opened that day. And I immediately ran upstairs, and I normally let Dave sleep in because he's up late every night working. He and I have different, like, I'm a morning person, he's a night owl. I ran up, I'm like, Dave, I need you to look at this. He's like, what? I'm like, look at, and I'm like shoving my computer in his face, and he's not even awake yet. I'm like, look at this. Isn't this like, I think this is it. And he's like, yeah, I'll get, sure. And then, like, he couldn't even say, I'm like, I need you to wake up. I need you to come down. I've got coffee made for you, and come look at it. So he came downstairs, like, that's it. And that, like, we both knew as soon as we saw Colin's portfolio, we both knew, like, instantly. And then I started getting all, like, anxious. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so good. What if I can't have him? Like, what if he's got another job somewhere? What if in this, like, 2 hours since he sent me his portfolio, somebody else has hired him? What am I going to do? What if he doesn't want to work on this project? Like, I had so much anxiety after I knew that he was the right person. I had to have him. And then, then it was like, what if I don't get him? So he could have asked for the moon. Thank God he didn't, but he could have. You can't do that next time, though, Colin, because I know.
Colin, so I noticed, of course, one of the most interesting things about this adaptation of the Book of Ruth is that it's set during the Great Depression in America. And I think for an era like that, it's important to try to capture the character flavor of that generation. I don't think you can just, like, take 21st century people and project them backwards, right? Like they have to have that sort of antique feel. So tell us a little bit about your artistic process. Like, is your style for the Book of Ruth kind of is this sort of your general artistic style, or did you kind of have to adapt your style a bit to make it fit for the setting?
I would say it did become a bit of it was like a learning process. Just sort of like, it was like the on-the-job training, if you will. So the process of approaching the book and the character design and the world building and everything is identical to however I approach any sort of, like, pre-production to any work I want to do. Because I get really obsessed. I get in the weeds with reference and context and history, and so I'm constantly looking stuff up and trying to find like the correct clothing, like what do houses in this part of Texas, what would they look like during the Dust Bowl? Like what would furniture look like? What does a phone look like in like 1902? And so there's like all sorts of things that I love to dive into. And so, like, when I started doing it, I just really wanted to get sort of the emotional feel. And so a lot of the sketches I sent Meredith when we first started were very, very loose, like quick sketches. But I just wanted to see if I could feel the movement, the feeling, the tone, especially like when it came to some of the workers in the fields and the farmers and things like that. And then also having input from Meredith from who she kind of was like seeing in her mind is like, how are we going to cast this, you know, these players essentially is who are you thinking of? Because that's what I always love to do is find, like, basically cast a book and use them as sort of this reference point, and then allow through sketching, like they'll take on their own characters. So they're not, you know, one-to-one that exact actor, but they just have hints, and it may just be like, you know, like a look, or they have this kind of feeling and they act this certain way, like through their movement, their gesturing and stuff. So so it kind of became a development, and then the style of the tone and everything. I've always been a huge fan of old movies, westerns, black and whites, and so I kind of like really wanted to get the feeling, especially as you go through the progression of the story with this, you know, this depression time of nothing, and then this opulence, and then right back into this depression time, and then back into the opulence. I really wanted it to have that mood, like to really, like, once you can start getting a lot of the grit and the dark toning to it, just mirror what the script is saying. And so that kind of was a development, though. Like, so that we didn't even necessarily think about it being fully grayscaled until I just kind of started doing it, and it just kept doing it.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like that felt right to do it that way. And regardless as to whether it was going to be black and white or if it was going to have color on top of it. And yeah, so it became sort of a learning process. And I feel like my wife was she was looking through a couple of the portfolios that have the pages in it. She was like, she pointed at one page. She goes, I feel like this is where you found your groove. She's like, right here. This is the page. Like, this is when you figured it out. Because she's like, everything else, like, it's good, but I feel like this feels like you figured it out. And I was like, I agree with that. I do.
And Meredith, I understand you were originally considering maybe using color symbolically for different parts of the story, but you eventually made the editorial decision to stick with black and white based on the strength of Colin Dyer's art. I have noticed like little panels that might use like a little slash of red, for example, though. Could you tell us a little bit about why you made that decision and why you think that's the right fit for the story?
Sure. My original intention for the story was to start off in just black and white. And then, because the story of Ruth is they go from this period of poverty to a period of abundance to a period of poverty, and then back with that. It's 4 chapters, and each chapter represents those different periods of poverty and abundance, ending with that abundance. And so I wanted to sort of bring color in, like start with a black and white, and then go into like maybe some grayscale and some sepia or some light pastels, and then really finish off that final chapter with this vibrant color to show how much things had changed. But as Colin was doing the artwork, and part of the reason why we knew Colin was the right artist was the portfolio that he'd sent. He'd done a lot of tonal work with airbrush and ink wash, and it's something that it adds a realism and a grittiness and to his artwork that was very appealing. When those first pages started rolling in, and Dave gets mad at me because he's like, Meredith, you put up 13 pages and they aren't even Colin's best 13 pages, just so you know. He's yelling at me. He's like, why won't you put up the best pages, Meredith? And so I put up the first 13 because it's a story and I am a writer, but they're not even the best pages in the book. But that was part of the reason why, like the artwork just had such a rawness and an intensity and such an emotion to it that, you know, I'm a big, I think because I live with an artist, when I first met Dave, I was a huge fan of black and white art. I'm like, oh, your pencils are great, but I really like black and white art. And then I sort of, you know, the more I saw the pencil, I was like, oh, the pencil is like, I don't even know if I like it. But there's something when an artist does their own artwork, because I see this now with Dave inking himself. Like there's an authentic interpretation that happens that when you add somebody else's artwork on top of it, you lose. And I didn't want to lose that, what Colin had put onto the pages, by having another artist over top. Ultimately was what happened. Like I just felt the artwork was so beautiful and I couldn't change it. And
go ahead.
I was going to say the one moment where you see there is that bit of red in that. That's because there's a very specific moment in the story where Boaz, after Ruth lays on the floor, the threshing room floor, in the original story, and he lays his coat over her, and it's his acknowledgement that he's going to take care of her. He's accepting ownership of sort of the what she's propositioned him. He's saying, I can't take you up on what you're asking right now. I'll take care of you. Like I'll see this through. And when she goes home the next day to Naomi, he gives her a gift for Naomi. He gives her a bushel of wheat. And the gift is very significant because it's that acknowledgement of him taking ownership. But I didn't feel like a bushel of wheat is very significant. Part of doing the story this way is to make it meaningful for people who are reading it today. And
right.
and I don't think anybody's going to say, oh, yay, a bushel of wheat.
Right.
So I did a scarf, and I wanted to draw attention to that by having it red, because that has like the color, just it has a significance as well. So that's why we did that. And then that red scarf appears again at the end of the story in a significant way, which, Colin, thank you, because I totally give credit to you for that one. I am the laziest writer you will ever meet. My goal is to hire the very best artists and then turn them loose. And then they take me and they elevate me into greatness. So if you think it's great, it's only because I pick the greatest artists to work with.
So maybe just as a matter of curiosity, I know that different comic writers have different styles and how much they direct the artist. I've seen some who will, describe panel per panel the action. They might be very detailed. They might just kind of like coax the artist or give them some general language. How much do you leave open to artistic interpretation for Colin in your comic writing?
I mean, I certainly do like page 1, panel 1, and give a detailed description of what I envision the panel to look like and what the dialogue is going to be. In terms of characters, I have an idea, but I'm open to interpretation. And I'm also open to interpretation in terms of how that page actually ends up looking. So if Colin feels like, if I've got a page that's like 4 panels and I've just designed it this way, but Colin says, I think that from a visual storytelling point of view, it will work better this way. I usually don't fight that, because at the end of the day, my job is not to visually tell the story. My job is to tell the story through words in a way that makes it clear to the artist. Like, it's my job to inspire the artist to do his best work to visually tell the story. That, I think, is the job of the comic book writer. And then I add the words again on top of it. So I feel like my job is different from, say, the job of somebody who's writing a book. All I have to do is inspire my artist to do their best work and to tell the story in the best visual way. And then it's my job to get out of their way and let them do that.
So Colin, maybe related to that, I'm just kind of curious as an artist, like maybe what mediums are you using to get the grayscale effect, and what's kind of your process once you get the written script from Meredith? How do you approach it?
Yeah, so materials, like I just use ink. So I have a couple little dishes. I've got an inkwell taped to my drafting table. But yeah, I just use a couple little dishes. One that's sort of like a 70% gray, and one that's sort of like 30% gray. And so then I'll use those and layer them. Typically, I try to do the most contrasty stuff first. So if there's going to be somebody who has a dark jacket, I'll do all the dark stuff first, note what's in the background, and then help use that to balance the contrast of the page. And then I always use brushes. I'll use technical pens as well for the really small stuff, but I've got a nice little arsenal of brushes hanging out here on my table. But that's my preferred medium. That's what I prefer to work in. And then, of course, for some of the lighting effects and things, I'll use my airbrush and then just like white paint or these bleed-proof whites to do highlights and stuff like that. So it's all traditional. But as far as the process goes, when I get the script, I always at least read it through, one full time, get the whole story. Then I'll read it through a second time with just a little bit more of like a fine-tooth comb, try and really understand and try to see the pages in my mind as I'm actually reading through it. And then I go into the thumbnails, sketch them all out. And particularly for this project, we kind of worked in little batches as I kept going along. So I would do a batch of thumbnails and I'd send them to Meredith so that I could get the A-OK that we were good and I could go ahead and move on. And as a lefty, I learned that I can make pages really dirty. I remember one time in college, I felt really bad because I had a bunch of pages that I did a bunch of texture stuff on, but in the margins, like in the bleed area and especially the crop area, it was like you could see some of my fingerprints from the pencils and stuff from my oils on the paper. And they stopped talking about the art and they were talking about these fingerprints and how messy my pages were. And I was like super discouraged. I was like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to fix that? So I just incorporated, like, for speed, I take my thumbnails, which my thumbnails are there. I've had some, like, my wife has described them as excessively detailed because they look like very little pages. But I want to be as clear as possible because for me, like, if I can get that at this size, if you can see what's happening in the whole page visually, then we're good. Then it worked. So I'll just take those, I'll blow them up digitally, and I'll just clean up the lines a little bit. Maybe I'll like reorient a couple things in the different panels if it's not quite where I wanted it on the thumbnail, and then I'll blue line them, and then when they're full size, clean them up a little bit with pencils, and I go straight to inks just because it's fast that way. And when I'm on the computer, there's that, you get the temptation to get really bogged down because you have a zoom button and you can zoom in and you can really get close. But then when you print it out, it's like this tiny and you're like, that was such a waste of time. And so I've gotten caught doing that before. And so for my own sake, just to speed up the process, I'll just real quick, make sure it's all clean, get it out, and then I'll figure it out on the actual page itself and clean it up to the best I can.
I've seen a few artists actually take all of their process art and they'll make a PDF or a whole second book of kind of the making of the book as kind of a bonus way of getting more funds. That might be something to think about in the future because it is always interesting to see the development process from thumbnail to the final art. We've been joined in the chat by Lyle Convoy's Reviews and Right Night. Thank you for joining us. Let us know if you have any questions, and I'll be able to feature a comment like this. All right, so Meredith, one of the interesting things to me is, the book of Ruth, as a biblical story, is kind of written in an old-fashioned style, yet it has so much emotion. It's dripping with emotion. So I think some of this might fly over the heads of a reader who's not familiar with the biblical style. But if you're looking for it, there's not just Ruth, but also Orpah has a huge emotional moment. Naomi obviously descends into misery and changes her name to Mara, which means bitter. The courtship between Ruth and Boaz, there's some really interesting stuff going back and forth there. So I can see a lot of how the drama would appeal to you. But can you tell us maybe why Ruth in particular of all the biblical stories?
I think it's one of the stories that I remember reading when I got my first Bible, where it was my Bible, from my grandmother when I was 13 or 14 for my confirmation. And I think it was one of the very first stories that I was like, because I think your tendency when you get a Bible is to read it from the beginning to the end. And as a reader, I'm like, that is not working for me. Because there's a lot of stuff going on there in the Pentateuch where you're like, I'm just like, he begat so-and-so and so-and-so. But the book of Ruth was like the Old Testament, and it was so accessible. Like, yes, there's a lot going on in that book, but it's also a story that, because it's only 4 chapters, it sets up, the line of David and the Messianic birth, but it's just such a, like, at the end of the day, as a 14-year-old girl, it was something I could relate to, because the Bible is typically is stories about men. And so it was very, I found it very refreshing, and something I could just dive into and feel like there was a connection and something I could relate to. And I think that has stuck with me throughout my life. And which is why when I thought, like, when I came to the idea of taking a biblical story and putting it into comic book form, that was immediately, like, of all the stories, that was a story that immediately came to my mind, because I do feel like it's so accessible. Of almost all of the books in the Bible, it's so easy to understand. The message is so clear, and yet the more you read it, the more nuanced and the more layers, and the more you understand, traditions, the Jewish traditions of the time, the more you understand about the women and the book and what was happening in it.
Right. Like the whole thing with the sandal being exchanged between Boaz and the other relative is kind of interesting. And the Bible actually does a good job of just explaining, yeah, this was a cultural tradition of the time. It was a way of marking a transaction or an agreement. So adapting it for a more modern audience, you've chosen the Depression. Like, I remember my grandma's stories about making gas masks during the Depression. So it is still kind of, even for younger audiences, it's still close enough in history that you probably know, like, older parents or grandparents who lived through the Depression. Obviously, it's a great illustration of famine, putting it in kind of like an economic catastrophe that hit America. So did that all just kind of like come to you in a flash, or was there maybe like a development process where you thought about, how am I going to work this story into a comic book format?
I just knew, call it divine. I don't want to say intervention, but creativity, like inspiration. Yeah, inspiration. Yeah, I just felt like the Depression was a perfect era, and I think the reason why it's so relatable versus telling a story in biblical times, which is 2,000 years ago. During the Depression, people drove cars, people used phones, people rode on trains, people, like, their clothes aren't so dissimilar. And that's why it's relatable, because we recognize aspects of our own modern life within those times. Even though nobody's got to walk around with a cell phone, there's still the basics of how we get around and we live our lives are there in the Depression era. And the reason I think that it worked so well for the Book of Ruth is because when I really looked at that idea of, like, abundance and then complete and abject poverty, there's no other point in American history where people went through that exact experience, where they had, during the Roaring 20s, there was, like, an abundance and that Great Gatsby era where people lived in such a larger than life way, and then all of a sudden, with the snap of a fingers and that stock market crash, people who had everything had nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes it, by having that physical condition happen, and people can relate to that because people were still invested in the stock market. We still are invested in the rise and fall of the stock market. We understand how that feels. And so then we can relate that to the experiences that the characters are having within the story.
Also related to adaptation, for example, we see the two sons a little bit more in your version. We see some of the people they leave behind. We see a mysterious stranger enter into it. So I can kind of tell you're interested in not just like repeating the story word for word, but in bringing it into the modern times, also trying to craft like a narrative around the story of the Book of Ruth that connects with these emotions. So maybe this fits into your general process as a writer, but how do you come up with characters? How do you decide what to emphasize and maybe what to put in the subtext or the background a little bit in adding these new elements?
Sure. I'm very fortunate because a very dear friend of ours actually happens to also be our priest. So when I told him that I was going to do the Book of Ruth, he's like, "Oh, I can help you." I'm like, "I'd love to get any kind of information you can give me about it." And one of the great things that spoke to the way we developed characters was understanding the meaning of the names of the characters. So, for example, Malon means sickly. So when we designed that character, I said to Colin, like, he needs to be sickly, and then that speaks to, I think, why he would have died, why Ruth would have lost her husband. And at the same token, Killian means strong, like he's he's kind of got his name means larger than life. And so we used that to create his character as well. And also I wanted that to be reflected in his death and his passing. So it's not as, I think when you really get into understanding why, especially for this book, names are very important, and they often are a reflection, and writers use them as a means to craft the character. It's one of the hardest things to do in a book is to give a name to a character. And it was one of the things I really wanted to understand and make sure was a reflection of the meanings behind those names when we did this book.
That is a really good example of contextualizing it, because maybe to a native Hebrew speaker, they just know the meaning of the name instantly, and that communicates something important to them. Yeah. You don't want that lost in translation. Fantastic. Okay, so Meredith, tell me a little bit about the variant cover artists who you've gotten to work with. I'm guessing you've had lots of chances to make great connections in the comic book world, but there's some really neat names. I saw that the Lee Weeks remarks got snatched up instantly. Yeah. So if you missed a chance to get those, sorry. But there was a chance to get some original art. So what was the story? Did you reach out to them individually? Did some of them contact you and say they wanted to do a variant cover?
No, I reached out to everybody individually, and I was very specific in the artists that I reached out to, that they also be artists of faith. Because I felt like it was very important for this book that everybody connected with it, be connected with the ideas and the message and the intention behind the book. I think that speaks to how you address the book. And so, not necessarily everybody I approached said yes, but I had a very good success rate. And I think, obviously some people I live with, like David, so he wasn't going to say no. And you never know until the end. People might say yes because people are busy. And so again, living with an artist, I understand how valuable an artist's time is, especially to take time out to do a project like this that maybe won't necessarily get as much recognition as doing, say, a variant cover for Batman or Spider-Man. But everybody was incredibly gracious, and everybody was right on deadline too, because I was like, could I have this? Really need it by this date, and everybody was incredible. So I feel so blessed that I've got those friends that I've developed those friendships in my life within the community, the comic book community, and it was very heartwarming that they responded so readily and so wholeheartedly when I approached them about doing covers for the book.
Fantastic. Colin, when I listen to you guys talking to creator, it's the Creator Talks podcast, you mentioned that Tom Lyle was actually the one who shared this campaign with you. He's very well known as a Spider-Man artist, of course, with his recent passing. A lot of people have been reintroduced to his work. Could you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Tom and kind of like what he was like as a teacher?
Absolutely. Yeah, Tom was, I'd say the most succinct was Tom was extremely knowledgeable. He was a great and hard teacher, but he was a great guy. And he was a good friend. I don't, any student that had him would 100% say that they look at him as probably one of the best professors that was in the department at the time. And so I actually, when I was first in his class, I was unfamiliar with some of his work. I didn't really even know the work that he had done on Robin, and I didn't know that he created, Scarlet Spider and stuff. So I did a lot. Like for me, it was like getting hit with this bus of, I was like, wow, so you're not just like a professor, like you're like a real deal.
Yeah.
So that was like very interesting, and so that of course was super appealing, because at the time I still was very much thinking like, like I'm going Marvel DC, like this is my route, like I got to go Marvel DC, and so I was thinking, I was like, great, Tom's a great person to know and learn from because he's been there, and man, he puts you through your paces, and I think that was one of the most influential things, is because he recognized people who had talent, but he was also somebody who said that talent can only get you so far. You're going to have to actually learn stuff, and you're not going to be allowed to just rest on your talent. And I remember he was like the last professor that I saw when I graduated. So after our ceremony and everything, I was saying bye to people, because I had, like, we were going on vacation. Like my family lived in Ohio at the time, so I was literally packed up my house, and I graduated early, so I had to come back to Savannah for this commencement. And so I was like packed in the car, getting ready to go and leave Savannah for the foreseeable future. And so I saw him, and so like I shook his hand, he gave me a hug, and we talked, and he was like, all right, he goes, so you're on your own now, and I'm not going to be here to continue to push you and kick your butt. So it's up to you. And he's like, I know you can do it, but you have to do it. And so I know that always like kind of stuck with me, is just sort of the tenet of like, never stop learning, and never stop pushing yourself. And so that's what I've always done, is I just want to continue to keep pushing myself. And Ruth was definitely a huge undertaking, coming from basically doing like maybe one or two little offshoot little projects for people that never really saw any light of day, just kind of help pay so I could get some bills paid, and then taking on a full-on graphic novel. It was just sort of jumping feet first into the deep end without your arm floaties and figuring out how to swim. But yeah, no, he was fantastic, and I remember having lots of conversations with him after class in his office. And I also remember having, during my senior year, I had a superhero comics class of all things with him, and we had to do a makeup class. And I remember that I was working on my senior project, which was actually doing something similar to the Book of Ruth, which was trying to develop the Book of Judges as a whole, as a comic book anthology. And so I was doing a lot of research, and so I constantly had my Bible with me at class, because I was taking notes and doing sketches and stuff. And so I volunteered to stand downstairs to leave the door open, because it locked automatically on a day off at SCAD. So I was sitting there waiting for Tom, and I remember him coming in, and he was having a rough week. And so we had like just this little moment where we got to talk a little bit, and I was telling him, like, I got to tell him a little bit about Judges, but then got to read a couple of pieces of scripture, because he was going through some hard stuff, that I was also going through some hard stuff. And I was like, well, hey, this has like been helping me out. And so we had a lot of really good little conversations like that throughout those. I mean, really, I was only 3 years in that department, because that freshman year is just, all foundation. So, but yeah, he's a fantastic guy, and he's very well loved.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Meredith, you've mentioned that your immediate goal for this project was get the book funded, right? And everything more than that is gravy. Are there plans for? I mean, the Book of Ruth is obviously short, but are there plans for maybe more projects similar to the Book of Ruth? Maybe other biblical stories? Are you waiting for creativity to strike again?
Not waiting for creativity to strike again, because yes, Colin. Yes, we've talked about something. I actually have 2 ideas now. So we've talked about one, and I have another one for after that. So yeah, I loved when I do a writing project, I have kids at home. This isn't my full-time job. It's something that I make time for. And so I want to make sure that when I'm making time to do something that I love, like writing, that I'm able to do it in a way that is meaningful to me, and that it's I think all of the stories that I write are a way of exploring something that I find emotionally or spiritually significant. And that has been the case from my run on Wonder Woman through my run on Rose, and even Xena and The Light Princess with Cave Pictures Publishing. So, and it's definitely the case with Ruth. And I think, there are always projects that you work on where you just find your groove and you're like, this is it. And I really found that with this book. And I feel like there's so many more opportunities to explore and so many fantastic stories to tell in this way, and show people, because it makes me sad that spirituality and religion and having a relationship with God can sometimes have a negative connotation for people. It feels like something it's become something that's judgmental instead of what I think it's intended to be, which is love. I mean, there's a reason that Jesus calls, like, we pray our Father, right? Like, when you think about your relationship with your Father, ultimately, I would hope that the underlying emotion that you get is one of love. And so I feel like there is an untapped market and stories that need to be told to share that. And if that's what I can do, I'm very blessed, because both David and I work in comics, and he's been very successful. So it gives me the opportunity to pick and choose the jobs that I take and the books, the stories that I want to write, so that I can tell something that I feel like I would be proud for my kids to read, and a story that I can share.
And it is kind of fascinating that Ruth, being part of King David's line and therefore Jesus's line, we have a story about Redeemer, which is a legal term in Israel, but it's also a love story connected to the idea of what the Redeemer does. So it's a very good pick. So I have heard that you are a homeschooler. I was homeschooled as a kid, so I'm just wondering, do either of you have good recommendations for teachers of comics that they could introduce, whether it's they're homeschooling their kids or whether they're just teachers in any school system? Any good series you recommend for young readers?
I'm trying to think of what Isaac and I have read, because I'm new. I have to say, I'm new to the homeschooling thing. I haven't been doing it for one full year yet. Huh. What did we do? The first book we did this year was Holes. So that's not a graphic novel. But I did grab Neil Gaiman's Graveyard. Does that sound right? Pretty sure that's what it is. It's like it's a book for kids. It's a graphic novel for kids by Neil Gaiman. So that's our next book. So I'm new yet. I will actually take recommendations from people. If anybody wants to tweet me or hit me up on Facebook and say, hey, I'm a homeschooling mom and you should do this. Mostly I did it because I just felt like our son is very creative, but he's not necessarily an academic, and has trouble focusing in that classroom setting. And we're already through I'm just bragging right now. We are through four math. We're through 4 math units already in the first 3 months of school. So, I mean,
not to toot my
own horn.
Well, I was gonna say not to toot my own horn, but I'm gonna toot my own horn. That's one of the reasons I like to do like kids reviews on this channel. Is I think it's really, really important to kind of like there's a lot of comics, so there's a little bit of sorting the wheat and the chaff aspect to it, right? So I always try to like take special attention of what's happening in the kids marketing world.
Well, then you
Colin,
can
you're
email me with your recommendations.
fantastic. I'll do that. Yeah, I've got a few that I've shared with other homeschool parents before. Colin, you're married. Are you buying up any comic books for future kids yet?
No, not necessarily. I mean, like I got the shelf behind me, and but yeah, it's kind of funny because I mean, obviously the majority, like the top shelf is like reference, and then the middle two shelves are all Marvel and DC. So obviously that was sort of where my background goes. But I know there's like a couple of them because there's some indie stuff that I like is not exactly appropriate for kids. But I do know probably my favorite that's sort of in all ages. That's just kind of a silly one is Atomic Robo, and that's through. It started with Red 5 Publishing, and I got it through a free comic book day while I was in college. And then I just felt the writing is so funny and clever, and it's very simple. Plus, it's like based in history, so it's like the robots made by Nikola Tesla, and so like part of it takes place like way back, and his arch nemesis is Thomas Edison. So like it's kind of fun because you can get to talk a little bit about like the current wars. But so it's silly and it's clever. It'll make fun of like there's like one trade in particular that makes fun of sort of Power Rangers and like the color coordinated ninja warriors that have like robots that pull together to make one big robot, and there's one villain is a talking velociraptor who's a scientist. So it's silly stuff, but they're really funny. And I think like as far as like accessibility to kids, that's always like the first one I go to is like, oh, Atomic Robo, because it's really funny. And even as like an adult, you get it.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah. So I think I have 8 of their trades. I think there are more, but yeah,
it's
I think
not
you can get them on.
It's not Captain Underpants, so.
No, it's not. It's not. But yeah, no, Dr. Dinosaur is the Velociraptor's name, and he's a time-traveling dinosaur. Fantastic. And even makes fun of the fact that he's drawn after the Jurassic Park dinosaur, which wouldn't be like actually accurate. So it's clever.
So for comics creators who are looking to fund their own projects, I think they're always interested to hear like what have you learned from the crowdfunding process? What's it like trying to reach out for opportunities to talk about the book, sharing it? Obviously you had like some learning curves on like some of the like funding tiers not working, and you reworked that a little bit. Everyone should check it out, by the way. If you just go in, one of the things you did I thought was interesting was you gave people the option to just manage their pledge and add a little bit more and then pick the tier they wanted and just message you to let you know what. Yeah. That would save them basically the trouble of like getting a refund and then buying a second one. So what, Meredith, maybe let's start with you. What's been your learning experience on the crowdfunding Kickstarter of things doing this project?
Be on Facebook a lot. I would say that Facebook, maybe not Twitter, not Instagram, but Facebook, and hitting up the people, like being on there all the time before even your Kickstarter or your crowdfunding project launches. Build an audience beforehand. Now, the advice I got from Billy Tucci, and I mean, he is a crowdfunding genius, is Facebook Live. I'm not good at Facebook Live. He's like, yeah, go have a cup of coffee and Facebook Live. I'm like, I can't just talk by myself. I'm like, hey, we're doing math today. I'm reading the paper. I'm not good at that. So that was a struggle for me. Maybe, if you can Facebook Live, then Facebook Live. Because the more people you can get to see your project matters. I feel like I had an advantage having worked in comics because I was able to access friendships and have variant covers by really big artists within the industry. And I think that helped the Kickstarter significantly. And I was also able to then reach out to people who I've met over the years to do podcasts for me. So if you're even thinking about doing a crowdfunding project, I think it's important to start developing your social networks, not just your Facebook, friends, but also following people who do podcasts and listening to podcasts and reaching out to people so that you have those relationships. Because I think those are the things, like I can identify people who backed the book after every single podcast or interview that went up. And like, it was infinitely valuable to have those resources and be able to tap into them. And then of course, family and friends. I mean, I think, the more getting them to share it and talk about it outside of the computer screen and generate buzz. I know at New York Comic Con and at Memphis Comic Con, I handed out postcards. I'm like, hey, my Kickstarter's coming out November 1st. Take this postcard. And I had people who pledged and were like, I got this postcard from you in New York and I was looking forward to it. And I was glad that you did it and I found it. So you just have to utilize it.
You just got a backer. Eve
Awesome.
Renaissance.
Woo-hoo.
Thank you, Eve. All right.
Thank you. So yeah, that's what I would say if you're looking at doing it. And then if you can, budget a portion where you can actually access somebody who will promote it. Because I did do that as well. Like I tapped into a couple of different sort of, because I mean, as soon as you put a Kickstarter out there, you're going to get 10 emails from somebody who says, I can help you increase your crowdfunding, blah, 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 blah. But there was one that I found was really helpful, and it was social.media. And they actually tracked, this is how many Instagram, because they created a post, an Instagram post, a Facebook post, and a Twitter post. And then they tracked how many people saw it and how many clicks came from that. And I think that kind of information is really valuable.
Yeah. Colin, this has obviously been a learning experience to you, from doing some artistic projects to doing your first graphic novel. Maybe to make it more specific, do you have advice on maybe how to stay focused, how to put aside distractions, how to meet deadlines? Do you have any advice for young artists on that topic?
He doesn't have deadlines. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I have had deadlines in the past. This one gets a little more loosey goosey. Well, it's one of those things where I think your work ethic, that is something that, like, that's not necessarily something I can say like you can give advice to. That's something that someone's got to look inside to decide whether or not they're going to do it or not. Because like, you can force somebody to do something, but are you going to get the best work out of them? And so what I've always kind of adhered to is do the best every day with what you've got. So like, there are days where I don't feel great, but I still want to make sure I get stuff done. And it may not be what I think, like, it may not look the way I want it to look. And that can be okay. Like, does it work? Did I get it done? Good. But I feel like that's the ability to have to like push through when you're not feeling it. That's probably the hardest thing. And I feel like the more and more experience you get in working on hard things, because I had, coming into this project, I had actually just come off the tails of a very, very bad project. It was a nightmare. And that was the epitome of, I just didn't want to wake up because I didn't want to go back to working on it. And so that was the epitome of like gut check time. You have to just do it. And you can't think about it too much. You just you have to kind of go a little bit into autopilot mode and just do it and make yourself do it. And I mean, I attribute a lot to like my upbringing. Like, my parents instilled a really great work ethic in me. And I did a lot of competitive sports as a kid, all the way up to the end of high school and almost into college. had knee injuries, which caused surgery, which kept me from doing that. But actually, the Lord blessed me in the fact that I didn't have to play sports at SCAD, because I would not be where I'm at if I was playing sports. But so like there's just sort of like I don't see it's like one or two things. It's always a learning process, because there are always days where you're just like, I don't feel like doing it. And then the question just goes, well, if you don't feel like doing it, are you still going to, or are you just going to allow that to just kind of be your default for the day, as I just don't feel like doing it. So, and that's a hard battle. And I think everybody, especially any entrepreneur, anybody who works for themselves or works in sort of a freelance capacity, like you're going to have to encounter that. And that just that's like an individual decision you have to make on your own. But to know that if you can make it through the day, like at the end of the day, you can be like, I made it through that day. And I remember a quote saying like, you've made it 100% through all of your worst days up to this point.
Okay. Nice.
So
I just wanted to let you guys know that you have cracked 23,000. So you've got a nice little like 600. You've crossed the finish line with an extra $600 to spare so far.
Woo-hoo.
Excellent. I understand it doesn't end at midnight tomorrow. It's a few hours before midnight, Meredith,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, because I couldn't stay up, honestly. The day it was launching is Halloween, and I'm like, okay, it's going to be November 1st. And I was like, it was 10 o'clock, and I was like, I got to stay up, and it was 10:30. I'm like, I can't stay up, but I promised it would be up for November 1st, 10:45. It's live. So it's like 10:30, 10:45 or something like that is tomorrow on Saturday night. That's tomorrow night, right? Yeah, is when it ends, because I could not stay up. Sorry.
So people should not wait till midnight tomorrow.
Do not wait till midnight tomorrow. You will
at least by noontime tomorrow.
Why are people such last minuters? I don't understand.
I think some people actually like it to be exciting and wait as long as possible.
I've got enough stress and excitement in my life. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need it done early. Please, you could have funded this like 2 weeks ago. I would have.
But your stress is exciting to them. They just want to see the number jump up right at the end. All right. Well, I asked all my big questions. So if you guys just want to add any additional thoughts, I'd say go for it. I've had some people who just like to chill and chat a little bit, but I'm really excited for this project. I'm happy to have backed it. I want to say I'm very excited about what I've seen so far, and I'll be watching both of you working in comics with interest. And you are welcome back on the show anytime you've got future comic projects you want to talk about. Thank
you so much. And I'm like, it's always like a catch-22 for me, because now it's out there how great Colin is. I'm like, is Marvel or DC called him? Am I in trouble now? Like, are we gonna be able to do more projects? Because I shared it with like industry people. I'm like, oh dang it, that was probably a stupid move. But
I'm just hiding out here in Vegas. Yeah,
nobody's allowed to contact Colin. He's mine. But I do want to say, since we're here, thank you in person to everybody who's backed the project, everybody who's watched. Like, it really, you never know when you put something like this out what the response is going to be. And the positivity and the love that I've gotten as a result of putting this out there has been overwhelming. And I'm so incredibly grateful to everybody who's backed the project and who's supported us through the project, from like Lee and Jason and Billy and David to, I mean, they're all 257, although maybe it's 260. I'm
278.
278 to all 278 people who believed in what we were doing and said that, yes, this is something that we want to see as a comic book. And I think that speaks to something that, especially setting a goal as big as we did, that will make the industry sit up and say, hey, maybe there is a market for this. And I think it opens the door for us to be able to do more of these and approach publishers with it, so that we can reach not just 278 people, but maybe 2,078 people, or maybe
Right.
20,078 people. Like, I just feel like because this project has been so well received and people have been so overwhelmingly supportive of it, I think the sky's the limit for where this book can go, and what these types of projects can do.
Especially if a publisher like Kickstarter or Indiegogo kind of takes notice of you, that can really help have a snowball effect,
Yeah.
where they're now introducing it to as many people as possible for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'd echo that. It's the entire month of November has been a little bit of a pins and needle month. Just with having a Kickstarter tab open and a Facebook tab open and constantly switching between the two. Yeah. And then also doing the work, and then life happens around you as well. It's been a bit of a crazy blur, but it is amazing. And I know it has the ups and downs, like starting off and you're just like, you're on this big high because you've announced it and it's finally out there, and like it's all this time, and it's sort of like releasing the pressure cooker of all of the work that has led into it up into this point, and it's like kind of being quiet about it for so long, and you've got that huge exhilaration, and you're like, oh man, okay, now we're on the clock. And that gets it can get really tedious, and I know that like when you stop, like the momentum sort of slows down a little bit, it's really easy to get discouraged. And just in the last like week, it has been huge, and everybody who's backed it has been amazing, and people that I've met in person that have talked to me about it and stuff it's been a huge encouragement for all of the work that we've put into it. And I know this was Meredith's baby for such a long time before it even came across my plate, and so now I get to have a little bit of this baby as well, and it's reassuring, and it's a wonderful feeling to know that other people want to read what we made.
Are you happening to be working on the comic as we're talking?
Yeah, I am actually.
Nice! A little piece of history.
Yeah.
Colin, have you considered joining drawing live streams before?
I actually, so back in like 2015, when Periscope first came out, my wife and I, we both got onto the platform very early on. And so I was actually, had a mount, and I would do, I'd show the pages of stuff I was working on. It was just personal project stuff. And I talked to the crowd, and then I did like every Tuesday, I had my little thing called Tutorial Tuesday, where I would take like a couple things and people would ask like, how do you draw this? And I try to break it down simply, like, how do you draw like eyes? How do you draw hands? How do you draw a gun? Things like that. So just kind of talk my way through it and do that for an hour. And so we did that for a couple of years, and but we kind of got a little jaded and burnt out by some of the live stream company that we got to know. And so we just kind of and it was also, we were getting a little too obsessed with the notoriety of like live streaming and how many views you get, likes you get, things like that. So we got a little too infatuated with that. So we both had to just kind of really talk about and feel like, we gotta step away.
Yeah, it can definitely be a temptation to like become a professional live streamer or YouTuber. I've definitely felt that temptation. Christina Lynn has said, can we see the page? Could you maybe hold it up to the camera?
Am I allowed to, Meredith? That's up to Meredith.
Yeah, you can. Oh,
Little
this is
page
like
98.
this is an exclusive.
Excellent.
Only here. There's no dialogue.
So yeah.
Wow.
So good.
But it's funny because I've had to buy new portfolios because I have so many pages.
Right.
Don't worry.
Pages now.
Don't worry, Colin. I'll help you out with those.
I have, this was the newest one that I had to get. It's very empty now, but I've now currently filled up these two. Ugh.
That's a lot of pages.
So here's Ruth.
Fantastic. So, Meredith, did I hear you right earlier? You said you do have the next project lined up to go after the Book of Ruth ends?
Yeah, we know what we're doing. Colin doesn't even know this, but plotted it out. I kind of know what's going, and then I've done what I did with Ruth. I gave it to my priest, and I said, "Hey, this is what I want to do." And his response is always, "Let me do my." I think he calls it his exegesis, and so he goes in and he dives into the story and really explores the biblical significance and the things about the story that need to be touched on. And we're just waiting to have a meeting because he's had time to play video games with my husband, but we haven't had time to talk about the story yet.
Priorities. All right.
What are you gonna do?
Wow. Well,
even priests play video games.
Fantastic. Do either of you have any additional closing comments you'd like to add about your work on this project?
The only thing else I would say is that, and I said this on my blog, I think that a lot of times you take on a project, and I think especially taking on a project like this, I kind of had the idea that I was doing something for God. But I have learned over the course of this project that this was him doing something for me, because I have felt nothing but blessed throughout this whole experience. And I don't just mean even because we funded the Kickstarter, because that has, and believe me, that's a huge blessing and it's been fantastic. But even just as I'm dialoguing the book, I dialogued through the first chapter. As I was doing it, I just felt within myself the blessing of being able to be a part of the book and to contribute a viewing, a different look at these characters, and potentially the opportunity to open them up for other people to love and come to know the way that I have. And so I think if I was going to leave it on anything, it would be that this book has been just a huge, it didn't end up being what I thought it would be. It ended up being more.
That was beautiful. Evie has kind of a fun question though. She asked, "What kind of video games?" Comics YouTube really wants to know what games David Finch plays with his priests.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if you watch The Walking Dead, there's a couple games. Usually they're zombie killing games. I could tell you, oh my gosh, I'm the worst because I don't play video games. I have to call him up and go, "Dave, what's the latest like Dead Zone, whatever, newest zombie killing shoot 'em up game?" It involves guns and zombies and killing things.
Okay.
That's what I can tell you.
I gotta have David Finch on. He can tell us all the time his favorite video.
Oh my gosh, yeah, have Dave on. I can tell you that he plays a game that has like the guy from The Walking Dead carrying a baby in his chest, like a little baby, and then he has like all kinds of packs. But our priest
that's Death Stranding.
Yeah, but our priest he doesn't like that game. He thinks that game's boring. He wants to kill stuff. So Dave plays that one by himself. That's a Dave alone game.
Colin, do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to add?
Just thank you to everybody that has really embraced the book, and just the encouragement. It's something that, because I know, like I've talked sort of with Meredith about just sort of my philosophy about how I never understood why like believers working on Christian and faith-oriented projects, especially creative projects, why there's always sort of this feeling and stigma of they're sort of lesser than, like low quality, low production value, and they just don't seem, it doesn't seem like it's on your A game. But I mean, when you have like, when you sort of got like the creator who created everything, why aren't the creatives embracing that and using it for their, like using their all for glorifying him? And so I've always had that as a philosophy, and wanted to do that with comics. Of course, never knew how to do it. I had the passion, but I had none of the resource. And so I've been blessed to have worked with a ministry, working on exhibit artwork, where I did specifically get to use my comic work as a way to share the gospel, but this being exactly where I wanted to go. And I knew that back in 2013 in college, but I had to wait until 2018 to make that happen. So it's sort of a wonderful thing. It was like the Lord's being like, I got it, just wait. Yeah, wait.
Yeah.
So that's just been a huge blessing. And so all I wanted to do was just pour everything that I have into this, because I want to, if I'm going to do something that's going to be right in line with what I believe and supposed to be glorifying to who I worship, I better be putting everything I've got into this. And so it's so encouraging that even through like the ups and downs of it, like the Lord has made it work, and we are funded, and the response is great. And I can't wait for it to be able to be seen by even a larger audience, especially those who don't share the same faith. I would love to get it in front of people who don't believe in the Bible, who don't believe, and just allow them to read it with an open mind and see that like there's so much depth to Scripture and these stories, and they're not just from an old book from a very long time ago. These things are still relevant today, and your themes, your tropes, everything's they're there. And I love being able to be a part of something that helps share that. And I knew that I could only be like one piece of it, and that was the art piece. And I'm really blessed that I got linked up with Meredith, because she became the other piece that I knew was necessary to actually get something like this out there in front of people.
Well, the thing that caught my eye about this project is it's one of those projects where you could just take one look at it and you say, I see the love and care in this project. And that's the kind of thing that really wants me to get on board and helping to make it happen. Well, thank you so much, Meredith Finch, Colin Dreyer. This has been exciting. I can't wait for the book. I can't wait to see more of it come out. And by all means, hit me up in the future for future. If you decide to do an Indiegogo, hit me up. If you have a future comic project, hit me up. I'll be happy to chat with you about your future projects, and I'm happy to be a backer.
Awesome. Thank
Excellent.
you so
Thank you
much
very
for
much.
having us on.
You're welcome. Thank you to our live stream chat. And the link is in the description. Their Twitter is in the description. Even if you can't afford to support it, please just consider sharing it with your friends. And thank you all so much. You have a good day.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.